Our focus today is on the attachment-related family pathology known as parental alienation syndrome. The syndrome is defined as the psychological manipulation of a child by one parent in order to alienate the child from the other parent. And sadly and typically, this occurs often during and following a divorce. And I know you are sitting there thinking you've heard a story about somebody, or it happened to your sister and brother-in-law, or whatever it might be. But indeed, and our expert's going to tell us, it is indeed a real syndrome. There is a pathology to it. We need to understand it before we might even be able to begin to address it. And as I've said, the committee's fortunate then to have with us today Dr. Craig Childress, a psychologist from California, who is a renowned expert on parental alienation syndrome. Dr. Childress will brief the committee on this syndrome and its effects on children, which many consider to be tantamount to child abuse. Also severely affected, as you would expect, is the parent who's been alienated in this process and effectively erased from his or her children's lives. Doctor, we welcome you. We certainly appreciate your willingness to travel across the country. Some of us have trouble coming 2 hours, from to get to Harrisburg. So we appreciate what you have done, and because you know this is important, and we wish to be educated. So if you would please come up and sit there, and you will have the floor. We hope, ladies and gentlemen, there will be some time for members to ask questions and further discuss this very unpleasant, but it is a very important topic. And I think, sir, it's a topic we really don't quite understand. And indeed, some would say, oh, it's not that bad. So we look forward to this.
Thank you.
Yes, that is correct. My executive director reminded me, Doctor, we have some copies of your book.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
All right, that we would be happy to share with our members. All right, called Foundations.
Right.
And I assume you'll be referring to things in there. Mm-hmm. And please, Doctor, begin your presentation when you are ready. We are eager to listen. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you to all the members of the committee and everyone who's here today for the invitation to speak to you. I am tremendously honored to be able to speak to you today and to represent the parents who are suffering tremendously from this type of pathology. That what I'm going to do today is I'm going to start by describing the situation that we find ourselves in. And it's pretty horrific. Then I will talk a little bit about the pathology, and I might get a little technical at that point, but it's important to understand this is not a new form of pathology that's unique in all of mental health. This is standard and established stuff. It has to do with attachment pathology and personality disorder pathology and family systems pathology. And once we return to the path of established psychological constructs and principles, we can absolutely solve this. The problem is we got off track. We got into the wilderness of new forms of pathology, and that's derailed our ability to solve this, creating a lot of high conflict divorce, clogging our court systems, and destroying families. And so I'm going to describe a little bit about the pathology, and then I'm going to move from the pathology into the solution. What do we do about this? And we can absolutely solve this once we understand what the pathology is and once we get the proper professional expertise to assess, diagnose, and treat the pathology. So again, thank you for the invitation. I have a handout that's in your booklets there. And if you could turn to the last page for a second, you'll see a picture of this little girl at a soccer field between her mommy and daddy and her stepmom and stepdad. That's a healthy, separated family structure. That's what divorce or post-divorce family is supposed to look like. And now, when you look at this, you can see how fragile that little child is between her mommy and daddy. Because if there's a lot of anger and hostility between mom and dad, guess where it's going through? It's going through her. And it destroys children when there is a good deal of hostility and anger in the family. The issue that we're facing primarily is that one of the parents in this family is a narcissistic personality or a borderline personality. There's about 5 to 6% of the population are narcissistic personalities, about 5 to 6% are borderline personalities. So that makes about 10% of the divorces will involve a narcissistic or borderline personality. They are excessively high conflict. And a lot of times people say, oh, it's both parents. No, no, no. When you got a narcissistic or borderline parent, it only takes one. And that parent creates this intense conflict that moves through the child and destroys the family. And right now, what we have in this situation is that nobody is doing anything to stop it. Professional psychology is not doing anything to stop it. The legal system is not doing anything to stop it. That children are losing a relationship with a normal range and loving parent. Parents are losing a relationship with their children, oftentimes for the rest of their lives. A normal, loving parent is losing their child, and we are leaving children with a significantly pathological, narcissistic, or borderline parent. And no one is doing anything to stop it. Now, this is not my field. High conflict divorce is not where I come from. I actually come out of ADHD and early childhood mental health. And I was clinical director of an early childhood assessment and treatment center and entered private practice about 2008. And that's when I ran into my first case of parental alienation. And back in 2008, I had never heard the word parental alienation because no sane mental health professional goes into high conflict divorce. Because high conflict divorce, it's too risky professionally. You're likely to get licensing board complaints from these angry, narcissistic, borderline parents. If you make a misstep with the legal system, that could be, you could lose your license or get in trouble with the licensing board, the legal system interface. And therapy isn't particularly helpful because you got these parents who are conflict, and so there's no rewards out of doing therapy. So mental health professionals go into other domains, ADHD, autism, trauma, eating disorder, anything. But mental health professionals do not go into high conflict divorce. And what that creates is a situation that the ones who go into high conflict divorce, the only motivation to do that is because it's very lucrative. Child custody evaluations are $20,000 to $40,000 per evaluation, and let me tell you, they are significantly problematic. Then therapy, there's some reunification therapy, they call it. There's no such thing as reunification therapy. Not in any model, not any theorist, no such thing as reunification therapy. But people say they do it, and it goes on for years. So it's a nice, lucrative way. You have your slot in your schedule filled, and it's paid private pay because insurance won't pay for it, but it's court ordered. And so you just, for 3 or 4 years, you do therapy and nothing changes. So it's a very lucrative for mental health professionals, but not very rewarding, and nothing gets solved. So when I first ran into parental alienation, this issue, back in about 2008, I started to look into this one particular family I was working with and looked at the failure of the legal system and the failure of the mental health system surrounding this, and I was appalled. Absolutely appalled by the absence of professional knowledge and the absence of professional competence. I was so appalled that I shifted my career out of ADHD in early childhood. Hopefully I'll have a chance to get back to that at some point, because this needs to stop. Families are being destroyed. These children are losing loving relationships with loving parents, and we're leaving children with the pathology of a significantly psychopathology parent, narcissistic borderline parent. So then I set about, back in about 2008 till now, to create the solution, to develop the solution within professional psychology. And that solution is to return us to standard and established professional practice. Now, on the first page of the handout, I have some discussion of Gardnerian parental alienation syndrome. And with all due respect to the chairwoman, the problem is the syndrome idea. Back in the mid-'80s, the psychiatrist Richard Gardner proposed this entirely new form of pathology, which he called parental alienation syndrome, that was unique in all of mental health, requiring this set of 8 diagnostic indicators that he just made up out of thin air. Now, there was some support for what he's seeing, but he made up, he skipped the step of diagnosis. Diagnosis is the application of standard and established constructs and principles to a set of symptoms. Instead, he proposed this new form of pathology called parental alienation. And in doing that, he led everyone off of the path of professional psychology. And immediately, establishment psychology challenged Gardner and said, look, there's no scientific evidence for a new form of pathology in mental health. And it divided professional psychology into the schism of advocates for parental alienation and detractors of parental alienation. And we will still see this division within professional psychology. There's no such thing as parental alienation. Well, yes, there is. For the most part, both sides are right. Both sides are correct. The Gardner's model of parental alienation syndrome, back in 2008 when I started to look at this and I looked at Gardner's model, it's horrible. It's really, really bad. I understand why the people who are critical of that are so critical of it. It's not a good model of pathology. And this is not a unique new form of pathology. He skipped diagnosis. At the same time, Gardner was correct. There is a pathology here. This is a narcissistic borderline parent who is twisting up the family and twisting up the child. So he was right in that respect. He just didn't do a very good job of diagnosing it. So then what I set about to do, recognizing that problem, the second problem that emerges from this is that the legal system is not designed to do family therapy. It's designed for different functions. It's designed to follow the law, not figure out where the pathology is in the family or litigate between whether the child should take soccer or music lessons. That's not the role of the court system. And so the court system needs to rely on professional psychology and the expertise in professional psychology. But the moment we wander off into new forms of pathology, we undercut the expertise that we are providing to the court system and that the court system needs. And that prevents the court system from responding appropriately to this type of psychopathology. So, recognizing that back in 2008, 2009, I set about developing the diagnosis, returning to the step that Gardner skipped. What is this pathology that we're looking at? And fundamentally, if we have a child rejecting a parent, that's an attachment-related pathology. The attachment system is the brain system for love and bonding, governs love and bonding throughout the lifespan, including grief and loss. A child rejecting a parent is an attachment pathology. So from just that place to begin with, the attachment system, it's a predator-driven system developed over millions of years of evolution to protect children from predators. The attachment system never spontaneously dysfunctions. It only dysfunctions in response to what we call pathogenic parenting practices that are producing pathology in the child. So if I have an attachment pathology in a child rejecting a parent, that's as bizarre as a parent rejecting a child. Oh, I don't like, you're annoying about your homework, I'm going to put you in foster care. No, that never happens. That's really bizarre for a child to reject a parent, because there's a predator who's more than happy to eat the child. In fact, bad parents actually more strongly motivate the child, because a bad parent exposes a child to the predator, so the child is more strongly motivated to bond to the bad parent. That's called an insecure attachment. And so I have an attachment pathology in the child. I know it's being caused by one or the other parent. If it's by the rejected parent, then we're looking at child abuse. We're looking at some sort of physical abuse or sexual abuse or something really bad that that parent's doing that's causing that child to reject the parent. That parent is more damaging to the child than the predator would be. Or it's being caused by this allied and supposedly favored parent. And what that pathology is it has to do with, it's out of family systems therapy. It has to do with what's called a cross-generational coalition of the parent with the child against the other parent. And so they formed a coalition against the other parent. And so I know one or the other parent is causing this child's pathology. It's just a matter of determining which one.